Okay, so I now kicked in the time-lapse, and this time-lapse will come in two parts. One part I will narrate, the other part I will just have some music under it, but everything will also of course still be in real time as like an extra chapter. So the reason that I'm doing this one as a narration is because a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here is visual language. It's about just getting the general shape and feel for the things. It's not so much about new techniques, but just how we place everything. So that's what I'm doing over here. I'm splitting my viewport into two. You can do that by pressing the little three bars and then going down to your views and then setting it to two. Or you can go over at the top to window, viewport, and just create a new viewport. And I'm basically just creating cubes. The main goal for these cubes are scale, height, and position. So we are placing these cubes in order to basically get like a general idea of where I want everything to be. This because I wanted to get a little bit of a contrast between the two rows of buildings. Like this building over here, or like our right row, I mean. The right row, it has all of these buildings really close together. They are all kind of like linked together, and for the rest they are all in even levels. What I wanted to do with the left row is I actually wanted to just intersect some streets into here. Almost like that the streets go to like a sideways angle and stuff like that. And for the rest also have less buildings, but have them a little bit bigger. So I went for like a saloon or something like that, or like the corner. And then just like a general building on the side. So you see me over here just trying to get some inspiration of how everything looks. And doing that, yeah, this image I also actually used quite a bit. Doing that was quite interesting. So I'm just doing that. And then what I was doing is I wanted to create some kind of a way that we have one side of our street closed off. And I did this with almost making it into like a corner, into like a bend. This is because like I can get away with like having the backside to not have really anything there. So that backside we will just not aim our camera to that. So for this presentation I don't need to do anything. However, when I have a view like this, I do not just want to have the entire environment stop, dead in its tracks, and then just have like some mountains in the background. That will not look very interesting. So instead, I'm trying to like create a bend. And this is what I often saw happening also in my reference images, where one of the buildings is kind of like slightly tilted, and then they kind of like just go into that direction. So I was trying to get roughly that same effect. And that's what you will see me doing here. So over here, I'm like grabbing a building. I'm kind of like moving it to the side, and I'm giving it space that we have like one road that still turns left. And then over here we have like one building that is tilted, and then the other two buildings, they are straight. And doing that actually gave us quite an interesting effect. Now I just had another building that I just placed in the back, and this was just to close off my field of view, so that we cannot see whatever is behind it. And this turned out to be quite an interesting look to get something like this. Now at this point, once you have your cubes done, and this is a very handy way to just kind of like get the general feel for things. Of course, with our balconies and everything, it will change a little bit. But once you have your cubes done, what I'm doing over here is I'm just simply starting to duplicate some of my buildings and then turning them into the buildings that I want. So over here, for example, I do make changes, of course, as you can see over here. Just to make sure that the building looks a little bit different. And then once I'm happy with it, I can start placing it into position. So I can move it. And for this building, I placed it here. And the buildings, they can look similar, but don't make them too similar. Change around the doors, change around the windows. Maybe play around a little bit more with the length and stuff like that. And you will see me doing that also a little bit later on. So over here, I'm now, once again, as I said, this piece of the building I'm just making brand new. So I'm just grabbing like a side because I want to have like the building. And then I want to have a much smaller building sitting next to it. But I want to make it as if that this building is kind of like linked to the other building. And this was quite an interesting look, and we can actually reuse this building once more later on. And yeah, just in general, so I went for like a wall that was one short and then one super short, so that we get something like this. For the rest, it's just placing around walls. It is a little bit similar to the one that we have to the side, but don't forget that our camera is also quite close to this. So a lot of this you might never really see, or you might only see it in one angle. This is why it's not always that bad to have the buildings look similar. All I would recommend is that for your buildings, I would say that you grab like your main view. We know about our main view. Our main view will show the right side of our street. So grab your main view and just make sure that the main view will look very different. That everything just kind of like looks different and it has like a very interesting variation going on. Now we will personally do that a lot using texture work, so don't worry about that. Over here I decided that I was going to make like a stair. For now I'm just doing this very basic. However, I am going to later on in the second part of our, or maybe it is this part, I don't know yet which one it was. But I'm just going to make like a block out of a longer stair, which was just very basic. However, with our second part, I actually end up not doing that much of the block out as that I was planning, because I feel like it would be much easier if we first of all start by creating our materials. So after we've done all of the time lapses of our block outs, we will actually leave these meshes and everything for quite a while, for quite a few hours, because we are just going to focus on materials. Because in this specific environment, doing the materials first will give us a much better overview of how we need to create everything. But don't worry about that, because that stuff, I will discuss that when we actually start doing our materials, the reasoning behind it. In any case, over here, I'm just doing basic stuff. I'm adding some doors, I'm adding some windows. Just remember that, of course, these windows, they are not going to just be sitting on top. They will actually later on be embedded into the wall. But for now, it is just like a very simple, basic look over here. Now, this building you can, even if you want, you can actually just turn it into stone. If you want to create like a stone texture, or we can go, for example, to like Megascans and you can grab like a stone texture. That could be quite interesting if you just make it like a stone building. I most likely won't need to do that, or won't do that, because the tricky thing is that with Megascan textures, I cannot actually use those. Like, I can use them, but I cannot supply them with you, with these project files. And to create an entire new brick texture for one small building that we will only see for like a tiny bit in maybe one angle, yeah, you can guess that that's simply not worth 3-4 hours worth of work. What I can do is there is one thing I might be able to do, and that is use the stone material use the brick wall material that we created for a texture course that we have done for fast track tutorials. So that could be one thing that I can do. I will have to think about it. It more depends on like the variation. So over here you see me just creating balcony. That's why I don't really bother explaining to you what I'm doing. So that just depends on variation. If I find that using all the wood is not enough variation within our environment, then of course I will make it work. I will add some more variation, because even though this is a tutorial, I want to get a very good polished looking scene. Excuse me. And next to this polished looking scene, of course, yes, it needs to look very interesting, but it is also useful if I explain to you how to create all of this variation. Because I could just use one wood texture if I want to throw it in there, and it would look okay, but it would not look very interesting. I much rather want to give you the options to explain to you how we can make this look much more interesting. So, we have that building done. Now what we're going to do is I'm just going over here and I'm just moving across this building. I'm giving it some spacing in between the buildings. Once again, just to space things out a bit. Just because it might look interesting depending on which angle we are going to go for. And I'm just playing around with like the height and just the general scale of the buildings. Now I'm, as always, just having a quick look at my reference. Also at the Red Dead Redemption reference over here, just to see if there's something interesting that we can use here. And once I've decided which building I already created that is the closest to the one that I need, I can duplicate the building and the folder, and I can just simply move it into position, and then I can take it from there, and I can start by just improving this building to make it fit a bit better. So over here, what I end up doing is I was having a look, and I quite like that this one is actually quite high. So I actually end up leaving it at this height. Just because that's what you also see in our reference. And for the rest, I am just going to change the windows and the doors and everything to get a little bit more of like a different look. So yeah, you can see me over here just placing a few windows. But yeah, most of this stuff is very generic. What we will do is after we've done all of our textures and all of our final models which have the textures applied, then we will of course do another pass. And this pass will just make sure that every object is placed properly and nicely. I will also add some extra objects. At the very end of the tutorial, you might see me doing like a time lapse where I add like extra add-on objects, which are just very small objects that will just like add to your scene, but it will be no new information. It will simply be me doing some extra modeling. And those kind of things, they're just time consuming. They can take a couple hours, but they will not actually teach you anything that I've not taught you before. So, but we will sort that out. Over here, keep in mind about like the windows. If they don't fit perfectly, you can kind of like get away with it, but I want to be careful with it, so I'm not doing it too over the top. And over here, you just see me constantly flying around my scene just to see if I can also look at different angles to make sure how everything feels. Of course, there's a lot of thinking process going behind the scenes in my head on like how everything will look. And now what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to get started and I'm going to create a bar. And I will actually do this one completely from scratch, or mostly. So over here, for the bar, I wanted to get like a corner bit. What I'm doing is I'm just splitting everything up into 2 pieces. But what I noticed is that I cannot see the center, so I did it again. And then what we can do on the side is we can rotate it 45 degrees exactly. So you can see me setting my snap rotation to 45 degrees. And then we can just have like this 45-degree angle. Now this angle, what it does mean is that we need to create some custom pieces for it later on. But that's no problem. That's once again one of those things that I will do as like an add-on. That will just be like some extra work. But I don't know. I think it looks cool. And maybe we can use it in some way or another. We will see how it goes. The same goes with like the buildings. Maybe I end up also just duplicating that round bit around and just placing it on the other side also. Once we have all of our pieces done and we have our buildings done, it's not that big of a deal to add some extra buildings. The thing that we need to pay attention to most is our terrain. So it is about that our terrain actually does look logical compared to the placement of the buildings. That's why we also have those cubes, and that's why we also place the cubes even in locations where we will not have actual buildings because they fall outside of our camera view. So for the rest over here, this 45-degree angle will not have anything special in it. It's just to fit, to make sure that the building fits a little bit. And then for the rest, I'm just starting to like duplicate some pieces from other areas and stuff like that. So over here, and this is just like a very base. But I think, it looks quite cool. And then a nice thing what you can see slowly is when we move back to our original viewport or to our original main view, is that you can see all of those balconies just slightly sticking out on the left side of our camera, and it will give us a very interesting effect and it will give us a very cool look. Over here I'm just temporarily placing these models. However, this is temporarily. These models, as I said before, we need to create special pieces. Currently the reason that I'm placing them there is so that I can later on export these pieces, and inside of Blender I have the measurements so that I can make them properly. And for the rest, it's just doing like some scaling and stuff like that. That kind of stuff is no problem. And then over here, I'm, for example, like changing around like the pillar just to get like a bit more of like an interesting look and stuff like that. And just in general, it's like quite basic stuff. Same with like over here. The reason that I place a door there is that I can measure out the height that I want my overhead to be. Because you can see that I wanted to get it a little bit higher. And before I go scale up my pillar, I of course want to know the height. So that's what you see me doing here. And now I'm just nicely like placing these pillars on every quarter. And it is good to often have your pillars and everything at the same length. So, or at the same areas as that you have your beams on your building and everything. Because it makes it show that all of the supports that the building has, they are all even. All of these supports, they are all supporting the same weight, which is those specific walls. Stuff like this that kind of like comes into the area of knowing about architecture a little bit. So that one is always a little bit more tricky, and like an actual building artist who does it professionally, they will be able to explain to you much better. But most time, just look at the logics. For example, just like a few logics that you can just always keep in mind is that, for example, windows, if you have a 2-story building, the windows will be on the same level. You would not have 2 windows down and then all of a sudden at the top have a window in the center. Because that window, it would break the support. It would make the building unstable. over here also with like these beams and everything that we have over here. All of these beams, they are placed in very specific locations, and I try to also then have everything just feel a little bit more logical in terms of having the overhead supported by the beams and stuff like that. You can also see it in real life. So that's like the kind of stuff that we are doing. Now over here, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm now just working on like the top trim. And the top trim, for now, I'm just doing like some basic placement, but we will completely just create an extra variation of our top trim when we have finished this one. And that variation will just be a straight piece. So with that variation, what we can then do, because it doesn't have like the corner or like the angled piece, we can just freely move this around wherever we want. So that's what you can see me over here. And you can just see me kind of like moving everything around. And then at that point, I just ended up closing off because I felt like it was not worth my time to then also add the trim all the way along here, when I can just quickly grab like one of our beams and just kind of like place it like that. Stuff like that's okay, because you will most likely never even see it. So it's more like just in case that you can see it, that it at least looks okay. Like that it does not feel out of place. That's the main goal for this kind of stuff. But now for the rest here you can see, so we have like a nice little corner piece. We just need to do like some balancing for it. And then I'm just placing some extra windows here and there. And that's about it. So here now you can see how on the left side we get all of this interesting look. So we get like the height of like our walkways. We get like the different heights of like a balcony and of our overhead and all of that stuff. It's just looking really interesting. And that was the general goal of getting this angle, to get like an interesting look. So that's mostly the function of the left side. Now I will also, of course, just make some screenshots of the left side. So I still want to make it look nice in the very end. But for now, we can keep it quite basic, because we need to make sure, first of all, that our right side is the best one. That our right side has all of the focused points that we want to capture for our environment. And then the left side, we can just kind of like do that as an extra. And at this point, it is getting pretty close to the end of this time-lapse. In the next time-lapse, we will create some very simple blockout pieces. And I will also create some more generic buildings and also do those buildings at the very end. And it will just be building that. So it will be no new stuff will be covered. So let's go ahead and continue to that in our next chapter. And that will be the last time-lapse chapter.